Hello and welcome to a special episode on the Plot Mom channel. This is going to be the first of a whole bunch of fun live author interviews with more other indie authors, writers talking about their writing experience, their books, their method, and what they love about writing. So let's get right into it. I want to introduce my guests. We have the amazing Anne Miles, author of Sorrowfish, and Jim Rushing, author of Radio. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves a little bit?
Yeah, Anne, you can go for it.
Oh, I live in Louisville, Kentucky, right outside Louisville, actually, in a little town called Mount Washington, and I have 4 grandchildren. So
wonderful. Jim.
I am originally from the Pacific Northwest, grew up near Portland, adulted in Seattle for about 10 years, and then followed my wife to Europe for her job. So lived in Paris for a few years. Now we're outside of Zurich in Switzerland.
It's wonderful. I miss Europe so much, and I just can't wait to be able to get back after this madness of 2020. So let's kick this interview off. We're going to go through a whole bunch of questions. We're going to talk a little bit about light versus dark themes in fantasy. But before we do any of that, bit of a warm-up question. What childhood book left the greatest literary impression on you?
That's a good question. I mean, I think when it comes to like scope of a world, it's hard to beat Narnia for kids' books, really. And just the different worlds housed within that one universe.
It was really expansive. Like, I feel like the people who just read Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe don't get the full scope of like how big Narnia was and how long of a history they had too, which is really something that we don't always see in fantasy worlds, and we don't see that like evolution within a fantasy world in time. Yeah.
Other than that, I was big into the Goosebumps books. Particularly, I remember the Werewolf of Fever Swamp and the Scarecrow Walks at Midnight. Those were the two that really, really stood out to me. Just they had such a good tension and pace, even for a kid's book. And they were just scary enough to make you think that you weren't supposed to be reading it. Like it was a little bit more mature than where you were at, which was always a good draw.
Yeah. What about you, Anne?
I'd have to say the Susan Cooper Dark is Rising series.
Oh, I loved those so much.
Those books, yeah. And so those really stuck with and inspired me. So like even when I was writing Sorrowfish, I used her word Daewin for my word for wizard, which is also in her books. And Welsh was kind of the magic language I stuck with. So yeah.
Those books, I remember actually having like vivid dreams about them. There's some of my earliest dreams I remember of those, like, you know, the birds and the riders, and like it was just so evocative. I have very fond memories of that series.
Yeah.
Kind of leading into that, you guys became writers, so I would love to hear a little bit about the books that you decided to debut with.
Go ahead.
Okay. So my debut novel is Radio. It's a fantasy noir set in the 1920s in Paris. The basic gist is that consciousness is like a signal that you tune into rather than something that's intrinsic in your body. And there are different types of humans. So the rest of us, most of us, only ever tune into our own signal. And your typical mind readers would tune into their own signal, but also can read the minds of others. And then there are the people who call themselves the gods. So who we would consider the gods of old. They can not only read the minds of others, but they can control them. They can broadcast into them and make them do things. And so basically they consolidated their power into a group that is essentially run the world for millennia. And in the 1920s, Marduk, the god Marduk from Mesopotamian lore, is their chief scientist. And he figured out a way to use the largest radio tower in the world, which was the Eiffel Tower at the time, to expand their mind control abilities across the whole continent. And a few of the other gods wanted to use this to step back out into the light, to kind of reclaim their power and not be so in the shadows, which is a horrible idea. And Marduk knew this and was desperate to stop them at any cost because he didn't want his way of life to go away. He gets sold out. He has to jump bodies. That's something they can do, body hop, and ends up in the body of an opium-addicted jazz musician.
Oh dear.
And so the adventure he has to go on is in this completely compromised body with a few friends, but mostly people he doesn't know, and hilarity ensues.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I'm actually I just started it, and I'm very excited to see where it goes. I started both of your books, and I love them both. So
Anne, my book takes place in 2001, which isn't a big deal yet, but it will be. And it starts out with a sculpting student named Sarah, and she is a twin. And her twin is in the hospital with a coma. So her twin had an accident, and during that accident, she basically tried to kill herself, but she didn't succeed. So and then Sarah is almost ready to graduate. She's in her second semester of her senior year, and she starts having weird dreams. And so when she has these dreams, she's going to another place, and it turns out that other place is real. So, and the other place, so I start out with kind of an Ice Monster prologue. I start out with Tristan, who is a bard at the Bindery, which is the music school in the capital city of Bestua in Canard. And he goes to a class and learns about the song. So the song is magical. And there was a war 500 years ago, and this is kind of hard to explain, but during the war, the song was corrupted, so that there's discord and dissonance. So there's a magic. A group of people who are magic users called the Magisterium, and they went away, and nobody really understands what happened to them. And then out of that, there was one magister left, and he founded the Conclave, which is the scary place, and the Conclave with the king rules the land. And so anyway, so basically I tell people it's a bard, a wizard, and a college student from Kentucky. So anyway, and they have to break an ancient curse. So yeah.
That's a really, the strange attractor, bard, wizard, and college student from Kentucky. There's something really to be said about that, and I love it. There's so many novels that just combine things that shouldn't ever be combined, and it's always for the best. I know that both of you have a kind of different philosophical approach to writing fantasy, or different sides of fantasy that you really like, and you've described yours as kind of more upbeat, hopeful fantasy, whereas Jim, you've kind of gone towards the grittier, more darker side. How did you come to choose that approach? How did you develop that methodology, that genre preference?
For me, I think it's what I've always been drawn to. I'm a really jolly person in life, and I lead a very happy life. And so for me, escape into happy books just is never satisfying, because I feel like I'm reading a book about people I know doing things they do and having lives that I have. And so it never feels foreign enough, I guess you would say, or it never feels like I can explore as far as I'd like to. It's just too familiar for me. Whereas with kind of the darker side of fantasy, I feel like there's just so much to explore and so much that isn't me. I remember as a kid, my favorite shows were the X-Files and Unsolved Mysteries and things like that. It's always just been that dark realm is somewhere. It's I would never want to live there, but it's really fun to jump in for a while.
Absolutely. What about you, Anne?
I guess the biggest thing was I was really impacted by J.R.R. Tolkien, his essay on fairy stories, where he talked about the three things that make up a fairy story, and that's kind of it fit my worldview. I felt like that was really good. So he said that the escape was one thing, and then comfort. And comfort's really important to me. I think that our world can be very uncomfortable, and I want people to find hope and to find comfort in the reading. And then the other thing that he talked about was eucatastrophe. So, which is a really weird long word, but it basically, Susan Cooper called it the catch of the breath. It's when you have something wonderful, amazing happen, and the happy ending, but not just the happy ending, the one that is perfect. So, and you can see that in his work.
Absolutely. I mean, who can forget the ending of any of Tolkien's books? Like, they're all so poignant and just, even when they're bittersweet, there's something so uplifting and hopeful in them that, life goes on even when the worst has happened.
Yeah.
Other than Tolkien, have there been other writers who really influenced you in your writing? I'll start with you again, Anne, since we were just talking about Tolkien.
Yeah, Madeleine L'Engle is a huge influence on me. Robert Jordan, who I got to meet twice,
Wow.
Yeah, so that was awesome. The first time I met him, I actually got to talk to him and Harriet for about 20 minutes. I got him by himself, so that was an amazing experience. And he's obviously a huge influence on me. And then Lewis is definitely a huge influence on me, and I think he's an influence on everyone. So
yeah, absolutely. What about you, Jay?
For me, it was hard to peg down a list just because I try to scavenge from everybody I read. But I would say some of the more major influences would be Chuck Palahniuk, Hunter S. Thompson, Kathy Koja, Cormac McCarthy, and Catherine Dunn. That's the list I came up with. And basically what they all kind of have in common is that they can be super visceral and raw, but they still maintain their style. It doesn't necessarily feel just stripped down or just blunt. There's always an edge and a vibe to their writing, no matter how dark it gets or no matter how intense it gets, which is definitely something I strive for.
Yeah. And I noticed when I was kind of skimming over the summaries of your books and the first few pages that both of you have taken inspiration from places you actually lived or been or areas where you are. How does the real world affect your writing of fantasy? I feel like we experience it. If we write what we know, then the real world kind of has to influence us. How does it for you?
For me, I think it's really important for me. So with writing historical fantasy, I can't stand anachronisms. I have to have everything lined up correctly. And so for radio, it just made sense to place it in Paris. I was living there at the time when I started writing it. And there's just so much history to draw on, just both regular history and mythological history that it was just a treasure trove. And the other thing for me with dealing with the real world in fantasy, I really try to keep my asks low for my readers, maybe 2 or 3 suspensions of disbelief tops, and then everything else is real world. And then that's just my own personal preference. I don't think having a ton of suspensions of disbelief is necessarily a bad thing, but it's just something that always kind of bugged me. And so with radio, if you can stomach consciousness as a signal, mind reading and mind control, and body hopping, basically everything else is the real world. And I feel like when you do that, it makes the fantasy elements more vivid because it's a smaller chunk to grasp. And then the real world just feels so familiar, it's easy to slide into.
in a way, what you're doing is applying the kind of ask structure of science fiction to your fantasy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Where it's, faster than light travel, or there are aliens, but the number of asks is fairly low.
Exactly. Yeah.
And what about you, Anne? Like, I know that, obviously your college student is very much drawn from the real world. What about your fantasy world? Like, did the environment you grew up in, or, what your experiences like influence that?
Well, I started building this world in 1998. So it's been a while coming. And one of the core ideas that you kind of have to go with is that what do they call them? When you get music stuck in your head, earworms.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the song. That's actually the magic, and we do that here. So, but then in my fantasy world, of course, they do that there, and then it was kind of like, okay, so then how does that work, and how does that translate into magic and that kind of thing? So when I started developing the world, it was really important to me not to use the normal cliched elves and dwarves and all of that. I didn't want to do that, but I wanted to honor the roots of fantasy. So I have a group of creatures called Chimera, and they transform into different things. And so depending on which clan they're in. So the first one you meet are the Griffins. And the Chimera actually have a structure of, there's people, there's the ones who haven't changed yet, and the ones who can't change. And then there's some who have changed, and they're called winged. I mean, they can get winged. And anyway, so there's a lot going on.
Yeah, it sounds kind of more almost Narnia-esque, where there's just a lot going on, and there's a sort of element of whimsy to it that is.
Yeah. Gnomes. So yeah, there's.
Yeah. So. Actually, I noticed something in both of your novels that was kind of one of the reasons why I asked you to come on together, because I thought it was really fascinating. So in Sorrowfish, you have the concept of the song, and in yours, Jim, you have the titular radio, right? And I found it really interesting to see two drastically different approaches to the relationship between entertainer and audience, and the vehicle by which music and words pass to one another. But it does beg the question: are either of you musicians or broadcasters, or like, did that come from real life passion?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I don't know if you can see, there's a bunch of guitars behind me.
Yep.
I've been a guitar player since I was 11, 12. And then I played saxophone in school bands from middle school into my freshman year of college. So when I wrote the book, of course, the two instruments played by the characters who play instruments is guitar and saxophone.
Of course. I did notice that your protagonist hates jazz, and he gets stuck in a jazz musician. I found that very interesting.
Yeah, it was, and that actually came from a frustration of mine. Because the book is a dark book, I was trying, I will make playlists for myself to get inspired to write. Mm-hmm. And so I was trying to keep all of my playlists from the era, and it's all just so damn happy, all of it. And so it was really frustrating for me because I couldn't find stuff that was the right mood. I had to shift to the blues, and that worked perfectly. 1920s blues is great for that mood, but the jazz, it wasn't doing it. And so I just transferred that to that character. And so all of my frustrations became his.
That's wonderful. And what about the song? Like, how did that develop for you?
The song, how did it develop for me?
Yeah, like, did it come from a love of music of your own? Like,
I actually picked up the violin. I started taking violin lessons when I started writing this, so that I could write music effectively, because I was a designer. My husband plays guitar, and he's good with it, but I'm not. So I started taking violin lessons, and I sounded like a dead cat screaming at first, and then eventually I got better, and I did a recital, and anyway, so now I can play pretty well, and for somebody who's been playing for 3 years, so
yeah. It's I love the idea of things like a song or some like magical truth, like basic truth of the universe. It always just warms my heart. It's something that I've seen in a few novels, and every time it's one of those tropes that I'm just like, yes, give me more of this. So kind of switching gears a little bit, here on Plot Mom, we do a lot of talking about different methods of writing, of plotting, of, craft, essentially. So I'd love to hear a bit about how you write, like the actual nitty-gritty process that you use. Jay, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm not always great at following my own process, but what I try to do, I'm sure it has a real name in writing teachery, but I like to think of it as signposting. So I almost always have a beginning and an end that I'm shooting for. And then I will try to come up with somewhere between 2 and 4 twists in the middle. And then I just start. So I write from the beginning to twist number 1. And then I reevaluate everything that's to come. Does it still make sense? Does it still seem like that's where it would organically grow? If it doesn't, I change it. If it seems like I'm still on track, at least for the next twist, then I'll keep going. And then when I get to that twist, I reevaluate everything again and just slowly work my way towards the end to make sure that whatever path I'm on makes sense. I've tried being more deliberate about my plotting and trying to, make the story fit the structure I want, and I just fail miserably every time. So for me, that organic growth is really what works.
And do you write every day? Do you write in fits and starts?
Fits and starts. I wish I could write every day, but I admire people who can just write to write and are totally willing to go back and change it. But for me, it's such a struggle to try to motivate myself to write crap I know I'm going to just delete. It's so frustrating. And I wish I could, because I know that if I just got started, I would catch a flow and it would work, but it's a struggle. So you definitely fits and starts.
Yeah. What about you, Anne? What's your process like?
I sit and I stare at the screen until I see a movie in my head, and then I write it down. And that's pretty much what happened.
Hey, it's amazing how that does happen, though. Like suddenly an idea forms, and it's very rarely, at least for me, just like 1 or 2 pieces. Oftentimes it's like, okay, I have the feel for the scene, I have lines of dialogue, I know what the characters are doing, and it almost feels like it writes itself, because if you set it up correctly, it just goes. To our audience members, yes, there will be time for questions after, and we will absolutely be answering any questions you have. I love interacting with the audience. If you have anything, drop it in the chat. We'll get to it pretty soon, actually. I have a nice place for it soon. So here's a question, because I know that, as indie authors, we're just starting out, but we also have done this, pretty amazing thing, which is write a book and edit it and do all of that, all the way to publishing and getting it to readers. So if you had a piece of advice for a writer starting out on that journey, especially to a writer starting out on the indie route, not towards traditional publication, what would it be?
I think for me, just for writing in general.
Looks like we lost an Anne briefly.
Oh,
we can keep on going. She'll pop in eventually.
Okay. I think for me, it's just to ignore anything prescriptive. I think that there's so much advice out there that is, more of the give this a try, or this might work for you, or it might not. And I feel like that spirit of, picking up the tools that'll actually work for you and ignoring the ones that won't is just so much more helpful than, the people who are like, if you don't get up at 5 every day and write at least 2,700 words a day, you are not going to be right. It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. Everyone's process is so uniquely different, and like everyone's mind works uniquely differently. I
Absolutely.
can sit down and write 10,000 words one day, and the next day I sit down and cannot for the life of me write a single sentence. It's and as I've I work a lot with co-authored novels, and it's become very clear that everyone's brain approaches words differently.
Absolutely.
It's even just how we draft. What a first draft looks like for one person is completely different than what a first draft looks like for someone else. I've read some that are just so smooth and elegant, and every word is actually where it's supposed to be, and then others that are mine, a little rough and tumble, has a lot of like ellipses, all caps, put in description here, now, maybe tomorrow, maybe in a year, we'll see.
Absolutely.
Seems like we're still having a little bit of trouble with Anne. Hopefully she can get back on here. We're going to struggle through, but in the meantime, Jay.
Yeah.
How and why did you decide to indie publish? Like, what was the thought process, and what has your experience being an indie published author been?
It started off, so I've always had it in the back of my head. A good friend of mine is an indie author, K.M. Alexander. He writes a series called The Bell Forging Cycle. It's kind of a cosmic horror inspired urban fantasy. And he has been self-publishing for a number of years now. And so he's always been a resource and kind of an inspiration for me with that. But I had been initially trying for the traditional route. I was in the query trenches for about a year. And then last year I went to Worldcon for the first time, and that was really eye-opening. At that point, I was on the fence with traditional versus self-publishing. I kept getting basically the same response over and over again, and it was not quite right for me. But I'm sure someone will pick you up. So it felt kind of like I was in a relay race, and everyone was just passing the baton. And so at Worldcon, just seeing all of the industry people kind of bemoaning the state of the industry, but not offering any solutions, just kind of woe is me. There's a lot of woe is me. And,
I've sensed that from traditional publishing, like, woe is me, you just can't sell this type of book or that type of book. Sometimes the genres that really don't make sense. We were in a discussion in a group Discord that all of us are in about comedic fantasy. Something that seems to go wild every time we get a good comedic fantasy novel out indie, but who traditional publishers just claim that the market is absolutely dead for.
Yeah.
There is a disconnect.
There is an absolute disconnect. And I got lucky enough. I signed up for these things called cafe clatches, which is where you can sit down with somebody in the industry, and it's a group of 10 of you. And you just talk for an hour or half an hour or something like that. And I sat down with an agent named Julie Crisp, who is absolutely wonderful. And then afterwards we were talking a little bit, and she kind of gave me the scoop on where the industry was for my specific genre. And it was what I needed. It was the push I needed to just go indie and, keep that control.
Yeah. There is something beautiful about being able to actually deliver what your vision is. And there are downsides to that as well. Mm-hmm. You're too close to it often. Sometimes there's you need someone to just slap you upside the head and say, no, that is a bad idea, bad author, down. Yeah. But oftentimes also there is something very raw and honest about a lot of indie books I've read versus traditional books. They're maybe less polished, but oftentimes there's something unique that you don't always see.
Absolutely.
And what have the challenges been? How's it been for you?
Well, launching in a pandemic hasn't been great. So
right there with you.
And I think the biggest issue with that side of it is just having this be my debut novel. Visibility is so much more difficult. Just trying to get your name out there, trying to, get your book in front of people is a lot trickier.
And a lot of the advice that they give to newbie indie authors, the rapid release, get multiple books out, build audience through all these fantastic methods, work really, really well for people who are writing in those particular genres, like romance genres, like kind of the more like novella to short novel length books coming out regularly. And it is very, very interesting and difficult to take more of the kind of traditional published approach where you're just publishing 1, maybe 2 novels a year, going a little bit slower. It's a tough market out there.
Absolutely.
Sad we're not getting an Anne. I'm hoping she'll be able to get her camera issues solved. I'm hoping that she'll be back just in a moment. And we'll probably go back and ask her some of these same questions. Absolutely. But what, speaking of kind of different genres of fantasy and just books, what kind of like tropes and genres do you love, and which ones do you just drive you mad?
So this was actually a really fun one to think about. For me, anything that's an ancient evil or a reluctant hero or any sort of adventure that has puzzles that need to be solved, I'm in 100%.
I'm right there too. If there's a puzzle, like it can be absolute nonsense and like, there's a puzzle to solve. Yes, give it to me.
Basically, if anything feels anything like the Goonies, I'm ready for it. The one thing that I absolutely can't stand, it really just, it might just be me, but anything having to do with magic librarians or the books will save us or things like that always just feels so kind of condescending and backpatty to me. It's kind of like, if the plebes could only see how magical books are, then they wouldn't be so stupid. And I'm just like, I don't know. It's like the people who you're telling this to literally have a book in their hand. It's very preaching to the choir. And so that trope has never sat well with me.
That is legitimate. I feel like there have been some beautiful examples of magical, librarian and like book knowledge. Like for me, in Wizards of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin, the fact that everything has a name, and the people who gain magic are the people who learn more names, and you have to study and you have to read books to memorize all these names. That really was beautiful to me. But there are a lot of places where books become kind of a deus ex machina. Instead of a integral part to the world. Like if they are this powerful, why haven't they been used before? I think there's an element of like, I'm also kind of on the darker side. While I really like hopeful themes, I write darker and grittier stuff, and there's something about the whimsy of that is a little bit rough. What about tropes you love?
I mean, I think going back to like the ancient evil trope, I feel like is one where it's really easy to do wrong, but it's such a deep well that I feel like too many people go right back to the same version of that, the demon in the pit or things like that. Whereas it's a pretty broad, basic concept. And I would love to see more
so here's the question.
Takes on that.
Do you prefer of the dark ancient evil, the dark ancient mysterious evil that you never fully see, like Cthulhu or Sauron, or do you like the dark evil who comes right on out and is freed and suddenly is in your face and completely there as a character?
That's a good question. I would say that I prefer the unseen, with the caveat if the unseen uses an avatar. So I'm fine with them being a full in-your-face character if it's still not them. I find that to be really effective. But when it's just the guy with the horns blowing fire at you, it can be good, but it's just not quite as compelling.
Yeah, I do agree. I like having a little bit, like I like having the snark of an active antagonist, but the threat of, oh man, this can squash you, all your armies, all your magic, doesn't matter what you do, it is hopeless. The moment it is hopeless enters into a story, I'm just like hooked. Okay, it's hopeless. So how are they going to succeed?
Yeah, it's so much better when you can't see the bottom.
Yes, I talk a lot about like raising the stakes and how to do that, effectively, because you see places where it's done really, really well, where the raising of the stakes is super consistent with the hero acquiring new skills and new, tenacity to deal with this, rising threat of at the end.
Yeah.
And then you see ones where it's like the power will go really, really high, and then the hero will go really high, and then they have to like make it even more. And it's the, starting with the world will end versus starting with this city or person or town or country will end. It's always interesting to see where people draw the line of what the evil is actually threatening.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what are you working on now?
I wish I had a better idea of that than I do. The current goal, what I'm starting into is a new cyberpunk fantasy series.
Ooh, tell me about it.
It's I don't want to give away too much, but it would be relatively near future, so maybe 2070s, 2080s, something like that. But the basic gist is that let me step back. I'm fascinated by how much people have gotten into crafts and hobbies lately. Like, it feels like with the internet, people really dive deep, but it also feels like people go very narrow. Like people don't get into leather work. They get into just making wallets, or, they don't get into pottery. They just make coffee cups. It feels very, very just narrow.
Yeah.
And so the basic idea here is that probably a corporation, since it's cyberpunk and that's what you do.
Taking down the big evil corporation is like at the core of every single one of my novels. I get it.
So basically it's they need a wizard or a witch and they can't find one. So they have to like slap together a bunch of magic hobbyists. So they each have specialized in one element or another of actually being a witch or a wizard, but none of them has all of it themselves. So they essentially have to make kind of a ragtag A team out of these hobbyists in order to get the job done.
Tap me in if you need a beta reader for that. Okay. That sounds absolutely fantastic. Okay. I am so down for teams of not quite the right fit misfits.
Yeah.
There's something super charming about that kind of team where everyone has a skill, but it's not necessarily the right skill for the job.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm actually working on, it's kind of a side project right now, but working on a kind of a similar concept of super, super specialized magic in a also kind of a urban fantasy sort of setting where the main character is a necromancer specializing specifically in historical research. So she goes into universities and reanimates like long dead bones so that, teachers and professors studying them can ask them questions, and she gets stuck with a curse and has to like delve into the larger realm of magic with this very, very specialized focus. And a whole bunch of people like that. So
I like that a lot.
I feel like we're kind of playing with some of the same tropes, and we still don't have an Anne, which is real sad. Yeah. But so final question before we field any questions from the audience. Mm-hmm. What kind of themes and ideas do you hope to work with in the future? We also have something like so far on the back burner that we haven't even like started developing it, but it's like this thing that you love that you're almost like scared to write. What's your crazy idea?
Yeah. So I have one, of course.
Everyone does.
It's a novel that would be some sort of horror, thriller, mystery, fantasy combo. And the basic idea is that in the entire novel, it has one single character that is doing all of it. It's just them in the wilderness, and you don't know what's going on. They don't know what's going on, and you have to kind of discover it together. So kind of more of an adult, edgier Hatchet almost in a way.
Yeah, I was about to mention Hatchet. That novel was so influential for me. as far as just like seeing what you can do with such a limited,
Mm-hmm.
small setting and cast. There is something like really engaging
Yeah.
about that deep dive into a single person's experience.
Yeah, so this would essentially be the Hatchet meets Blair Witch, kind of.
Cool.
It's definitely the one where the day I feel ready, I will write it, because
Yes.
if I fail, it's going to be a catastrophe. Like it will either
Yeah.
be throw it on a fire and never show anyone, or I'll pull it off and it'll be great. But there isn't really a way to kind of have an okay version of that story.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I have some like super deep dive ecology dystopian stuff on my back burner that I'm just like, I don't have the science for this yet.
Yeah.
I want to write it, but I want to write it in such a way, like, I've never actually written pure science fiction, because kind of like you, I need all the details to be real and I need it all to make sense, and science fiction therefore scares me so much more than fantasy.
Yeah.
Because
It's
you can
funny.
get it all wrong.
It's funny that you bring that up, because I find that when I'm writing sci-fi, I'll write my sci-fi more like a fantasy, and I write my fantasy more like a sci-fi.
That's interesting.
Like I'm real loose on the details when I'm writing sci-fi, just because it is so difficult. But with fantasy, I like everything to be really ratcheted down tight.
Most of my work is science fantasy, and it's interesting. My first novel, Where Shadows Lie, is on the surface entirely epic fantasy. There are dragons and princesses and rebels and kings and gods and all of that. And it is in the same universe as the novel that's coming out next week, which is this arcane punk science fantasy, down with the corporation, guns blazing pirate novel.
Nice.
That seems to have absolutely nothing to do with each other genre-wise. So yeah, no, I get that. Like, sometimes genres, we write them so differently, and there's so much like variety within science fiction and fantasy. Like, I love comedic sci-fi. Even though I feel like I have to write really hard sci-fi, all I want to read is like Douglas Adams and John Scalzi and people like that are just, laugh it up until you're on the ground, guffawing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm hoping we get an Anne back. She just messaged me. So hopefully we get her back shortly. Is there anything else you want to kind of tell us about your writing before she gets back?
Not that I know of.
Fair enough.
I guess one thing would be if people are on the fence about whether or not they think they would like radio. I have the first chapter up for free on my site.
That's awesome.
So you can kind of dive in, see if it feels right for you before you actually have to spend any money.
So here's a question. Who's your favorite character in radio?
Oh, that's a tough question. I mean, M is simply because he's the POV character and I was in his head the entire time.
Yes.
But it's really hard not to just love Bernie to death. I don't know how far into the book you are yet, but you'll meet Bernie, and Bernie's great.
Fantastic. I always kind of puzzle with the idea of, like, if I could only meet one character from any of my work, who would it be? Mm-hmm. And I've come to the conclusion that no one. I can meet no one from my novels because they would all try to murder me. I am too mean to all of them. Actually, I think I could meet some of the villains because I'm way nicer to my villains than I am to my heroes. But then they just try to kill me because they're villainous.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
But, there's always that. So I am going to field a question from the audience, and then as soon as Anne gets in, I'm hoping to get her POV on this as well. But do you find that the lighter side really shines in order to, juxtapose the darkness? Do you find that, like, you have to introduce some lighter themes in your work to kind of bring that dark and gritty reality to life?
That's a good question. I think that each is the foundation of the other.
Yeah.
If you don't have hope to lose, there's not going to be enough tension, and you're not going to be able to feel deeply enough in a dark book. And on the flip side, if you don't have the specter of possibly losing the hope in a light book, it's going to
There's
feel too easy and just too mundane.
Absolutely.
And so I think both types of stories build from each other. Even if there aren't specific elements of one or the other within the story, just the existence of the other and the specter hanging over the top really
yeah, I mean, I think it's a concept of like yin and yang, that there's a little bit of dark in the light and a little bit of light in the dark, and no matter which direction you go in, they're like, just by nature has to be the seed of other in anything that we work on. Well, I am going to give this 1 or 2 more minutes, hoping that Anne gets back. I think she said she was booting up her Chrome, so we might get her. I'm fingers crossed. She's just sent me a message. I'd really love to hear from her. For anyone in the audience, if you have any other questions, feel free to submit them. If you don't, but you'd like to see more of these kind of interviews or writing demos, I would be a subscribe, like. It helps the algorithms. It helps us get seen. We want to, share these awesome indie authors as far and wide as possible. All 3 of us are currently in the self-published fantasy blog off competition, in which a whole bunch of indie authors get a lot of wonderful coverage, and these wonderful blogs review us. It is fantastic, and I absolutely suggest that if you have not already, to go check out the competition. It has reviews of a ton of indie books, and like even the ones who have been eliminated, I've found so many books that I really, really love out of it. And I do think that because every author can only submit one, like you do get kind of the best of the best in the indie world, even at the start line. Like there are 300 novels there that most of them are actually going to be absolutely fun to read. How has that been for you, Jay? Like,
it's been great. It was really good for my wife, who designed my cover. But she's a graphic designer, and she did an outstanding job. But I got a judge vote in the cover competition, so I was one of the top covers out of the whole 300, which was great. Super excited about that. And then I got my first review back from my blog. Really, really encouraging. I'm still in the running to be a semifinalist, so not eliminated yet.
Congratulations.
Yeah, so that was Travis over at the Fantasy Inn did a good job for me. I was very happy with his review. But I'm feeling very encouraged. Radio's not your typical fantasy novel, and so people seem to like it, and I'll be happy wherever I fall, just because this is a fantasy competition, and I'm not your standard fantasy. So if you like that, that's great.
I think that's kind of the joy of indie publishing, is you don't necessarily just get your standard fantasy. You get these like super different stories. I mean, I've been following all the reviews. I've been reading a few of the books, and just the breadth of what is fantasy, from these like really insightful, short, deep novels with just a hint of magical realism, all the way to, elves and dwarves and dragons. Like there's everything in between. And to anyone who thinks that the fantasy genre is still just elves and dwarves and wizards, it's why I read mostly indie now. There is so much creativity going around, and so many wonderful. Hello, we got an Anne. Fantastic. We've been worried about you. You've been gone forever.
I know. I'm like, what in the heck? Anyway, sorry about that, guys.
No, you're fine. Well, but now you are on the spotlight, because we're going to be asking you all these different questions.
Okay.
It's going to be fun.
All right.
All right. So, why did you decide to indie publish?
I decided to indie publish because I was already doing a lot of promotion and marketing for other people. And so I wanted to, marketing is my day job, sort of. And I had done that for my own business for 19 years. So I felt really comfortable doing it. And I sort of half-heartedly put out feelers for an agent, but didn't really push for it because I kind of felt like self-publishing was my thing. So I wanted creativity. I wanted to be able to do the cover. I'm a designer. I wanted to be able to do the website. I wanted to be able to do everything. And I knew that if I got a traditional publisher, I wasn't going to be able to do that. So, yeah.
Yeah, there is, we were talking about it earlier, like the ability to be able to control the creative part of writing is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Kind of to that end, I'm going to combine a few questions because we've been talking. So because indie publishing is so wide and creative, what are some of like the tropes, the ideas, the plots that you found that you really love or hate that are kind of outside of the norm of traditional publishing? What's in the indie sphere?
I don't know. Okay, so I'm a huge classic fantasy fan, so I'm not like, really into
Fair enough.
anything super crazy. So I like, but and one thing that I find really, really important is the whole idea of good against evil. That there is a good, there is an evil, and I think that's something that's missing from traditional publishing today.
Yeah.
And so I kind of wanted to bring it back, and and kind of focus on it. So that's something. I don't think that I'm so much going for things that that things that are weird. I'm kind of trying to do classic things,
Yeah.
in an
I think it's really like lovely because again, like indie books get a bad name.
Yeah.
Just across the board. Yeah. And the fact that there are people who are, really trying to, focus on their craft and do really classic, beautiful, thoughtful fantasy right next to people who are being really, kind of innovative and pushing the bubble. But that environment where those two things are equally valid and are equally gaining an audience, and like that is something that we don't see much anywhere else. Like when there are, when someone at a corporate level decides what the trends for this year are going to be.
Right.
You just don't see that breadth of experience and that, wonderful dynamic difference in what you can pick up on a given day. So from the audience, we had a question of, do you think that you need a little bit of darkness in the like lighter side of fantasy to juxtapose them in your work? Like, is there a place for darkness in lighthearted fantasy?
Oh, sure. Yeah. And I was going to tell you guys, it's not like my characters all fart rainbows or anything. I mean, it's not like that.
No, I don't think that all light fantasy should be. Like, I think that's maybe what some children's fantasy is, but I feel like adult light fantasy is just a matter of where the focus is, and the focus is on hope, and the focus is on, good.
Yes.
Triumphing over evil, not necessarily that the journey is all happiness and rainbows.
Right.
I'm not gonna lie, if I read some back cover copy that had rainbow farts, I'd probably pick the book up. Just saying.
That is You should watch my D&D podcast. We were vomiting rainbows last night.
There you go.
Yeah. So, but I mean, any story that just, has people end up singing Kumbaya is going to be really boring. So
absolutely,
you have to have some darkness in there. It's not like, Mordor was dark,
very,
I mean, and the gods, what was it? Tarkan that Lewis had, I mean, there's darkness in every story, but my focus isn't on that, and my character's focus isn't on that. I mean, my character, okay, I will be honest with you guys. My book is probably as funny as anything else that I've read. And I'm not just saying that. I mean, everybody who's read it has basically said, I burst out laughing at this, so even the people, and I haven't had very many people dislike it yet. I mean, I don't know if that's just because I'm lucky or that not enough people have read it yet or whatever, but pretty much everybody who's read it has pretty much liked it. So I'm happy about that. And I think that that the darkness that's in there it's funny. I have reviews that say that my book is very, very clean. Well, I have a child sacrifice in there, and it's like, well, yeah, it's clean except for the child sacrifice. Okay, but there's no cussing.
Yeah, I don't know that I could write a clean book. My kind of signature move is a whole lot of swear words, like piled one atop the other until you burst out laughing.
Yeah. So, but I don't cuss myself, so I don't write that way, and it's fine,
Well, that makes total sense. I mean, I feel like so much of who you are as a person makes it into your writing.
Yeah.
And if it's something that's completely foreign to how you communicate anyway, it's going to be a lot tougher to try to shoehorn that in,
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Unless I'm playing video games, I will say that.
There you go.
There's always a place. Yeah. I actually went through a really weird transition there where when I was in high school and college, I never swore. I have friends who could count on their hand, like one hand, how many times they caught me swearing. And then at some point, I actually made the deliberate choice to start swearing because I was dealing with a lot of medical stuff. And I was like, I need to be able to be like, this bleep, 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 bleep hurts.
Yeah.
And from that point on, actually, weirdly, my writing just took off as far as speed because I realized that the thing that my characters were missing, these very specific characters, was just a ton of swear words. And it's not every character, it's specific characters. But the moment I started swearing, they were just like, okay, now we exist. Now we're real people.
Yeah.
But no, we were talking a little bit about like, darkness and light and fantasy and, the concept of yin and yang and how there has to be, there's always something of the other in any story. And I think that we as adults sometimes forget the darkness in our childhood books.
Yeah.
How very, very deep and like intense those messages sometimes were. But question. So, Anne, what are you working on now?
Well, I'm finishing up my ghostwriting book, but I'm also working on book 2, which is the story of Dane, my wizard character, and how he has to go and find the refrains. So the refrains have all been hidden throughout Canard, and he and Sarah have a special relationship now, and they're not dating, not that, but anyway, but they have a different sort of relationship. It would be a spoiler for me to tell you, but anyway, so just working that out, and then I've got a cognoscenti, so it's like the Illuminati.
Cool.
So, and they're here in on Earth, and they try to control things. So anyway, it's a fun write, but it's a lot of work and it's a lot of thought, and it took me 3 years to do Sorrowfish. So I'm not one of those people who just turns out a book. I don't do that. So I've got to really, really think about it and consider it. So yeah.
And like how, obviously you decided to indie publish and that kind of gives you more freedom to do that. But do you think that it's been a challenge for you to not, push out books like that? Or do you think that it makes your books that you're giving it the time that it needs and that's part of your process?
Yeah. I listened to on the girl that wrote Eat, Pray, Love do a TED Talk about her process and about how that worked, and she said that you have to think of it as having a genius and not being a genius, and that the genius was kind of like the little house elf Dobby who showed up and talked to you and that kind of thing, and that's really how I see what I do. So if my little house elf doesn't show up and talk to me, then I'm not going to write because I don't feel like I have the permission from, the universe to write. So, so taking the time isn't really dependent completely on me. It's also depended on my genius. That's, you know, and
Hiding in the corner. Yes.
Yeah,
I saw that same TED Talk, and it was really inspiring. Just the idea of taking that the burden that we carry to, you know, do it again. If you wrote a good book, do it again. Or if you haven't written a good book, do it the first time. And taking that back and saying, no, it will come when it comes. It will come. Like, I can do things to make myself ready for it. I can practice my craft. I can learn different skills. I can get better at what I do. But the true moments of like where it all clicks, that's just something bigger. And like, again, you can hedge your bets by becoming as good a writer as you can be.
Yeah. And so, you know, I'm still trying to write every day, but I'm not freaking out if it doesn't get there that day, you know. So
lucky. I can't do that. Every time I sit down to write, I'm just like, okay, gotta write 2,000 words, gotta write 5,000 words, and then inevitably end up in a pile in the corner crying because it didn't happen.
Right. Or, you know, or like Jim said, you know, deleting them all. You know,
yes.
I don't want to do that. You know, if I write it, it's going to be because on purpose. I wrote it because it was important. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Do you guys ever have the moment when you realize, though, that like something you wrote doesn't work and then you have to delete a whole bunch of stuff? Because that happens to me all the time.
Oh, yeah.
I have a discard folder where I put everything but I keep it because it might work somewhere else.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes.
Same.
Yeah.
No, my snippets folder keeps getting larger and larger and larger, and someday one of those will actually happen. So, kind of as a final question, and kind of chance, tell us what you guys have going on right now, how to find you, how to find your book, how to support you, and what you have going on.
For me, so I was lucky. I was able to brand myself pretty uniformly across the interwebs. So my book Radio is up on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, a bunch of other places. And I have links to all of it on my website, which is jrushingwrites.com. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram at jrushingwrites. So it's all nice and even. And on my site, I also have a bunch of bonus materials. The first chapter's up for free, like I mentioned earlier. So it's a good place. My blog's there as well. So just poke around, see if it's something that you think you might be interested in.
What about you, Anne?
If you go to sorrowfish.com, you can see everything. It's all there. So, the book is at Amazon. I am on Kindle Unlimited, so it's just at Amazon, although you can get the paperback everywhere. So, and you can connect with me there at sorrowfish.com.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for coming on. This has been an absolute blast. I may have to ask you on again for some fun, like writing demos and things, discussions
Absolutely.
about craft.
Yeah.
For everyone watching, if you want more content like this, make sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment. If you want to support Jim and Anne, please share this with your friends. I want to get the news of their novels as far as possible. They're both really good from what I've read so far, and I'm excited about finishing them up. If you want to help support me and my channel grow, again, like, subscribe. You can find me pretty much everywhere as Author Allegra. And I have a Discord for this channel. So if you're a writer and if you want to talk craft and get all the news right when it happens, you can find me. I have a link down below on the description. And thank you so much for coming and watching. See you later.